On Thanksgiving Day, my son blocked the door and shouted, "You are no longer part of our family. Go away." I saw his wife giggling behind his back, enjoying the humiliation. They were waiting for me to fail, but I just nodded, got in the car, and made one phone call. 5 minutes later, half the guests got up from the table and followed me, leaving them. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Why can't you be more like Silas? The newspaper crumpled in my hands. Corbett stood by the door, coat still on, his face twisted with something I'd never seen before. Pure contempt. "What did you just say?" "You heard me, Dad." He stepped closer, pointing at our modest living room. "Look at this place. Look at your life. Silas Valit built an empire. What have you built? A pension and an old Honda?" I set the paper down carefully. My reading glasses slipped. "Corbett, what's gotten into you?" "Reality has gotten into me." His voice cracked like ice. "Do you know what it's like being married to his daughter? Do you know what it's like explaining why my father lives in a house that could fit in their garage?" The words hit harder than fists. I stood slowly, my knees protesting. "I raised you. I sacrificed everything for your education, your future." "Sacrificed what exactly?" He laughed, but it sounded broken. "Your engineering job? Your quiet little retirement? Your precious dignity?" "Son, please." "Don't call me son right now." Corbett turned toward the window, avoiding my eyes. "Silas calls me a disappointment, says I married above my station, says my father's a failure who never amounted to anything." The room felt smaller suddenly, colder. "He said that?" "He didn't have to say it directly. I can see it in his eyes every family dinner, every business meeting, every time he looks at Mira and then at me." Corbett's shoulders shook. "She deserves better than this, better than us." I reached for him. "Your mother would be heartbroken hearing you talk this way." "Mom's dead, Dad. She's been dead for 3 years, and you're still living like she's coming back." He shrugged away from my hand. "While Silas builds hotels and restaurants, you clip coupons and drive a 15-year-old car. Money isn't everything, Corbett." Easy to say when you've never had any real responsibilities. His eyes blazed with unexpected coldness. "When you've never had to provide for someone who grew up with everything." I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, but from something deeper, betrayal. "Is this why you came tonight? To tell me I'm a disappointment?" "I came to tell you the truth." Corbett moved toward the door, his hand on the knob. "Mira wants us to have dinner with her father, Sunday, business dinner. He's discussing some family investments." "What kind of investments?" "The kind that might finally give us a real future." He opened the door, letting cold November air sweep through. "Try to dress appropriately, if you have anything appropriate." The door slammed behind him. I stood there listening to his footsteps on the walkway. His car door opened, then slammed shut. The engine turned over but didn't catch immediately. Strange grinding noises came from outside. Corbett cursed loudly enough for me to hear through the walls. Finally, the engine started. Gravel crunched as he backed out of the driveway too fast. The silence that followed felt heavier than his words. I looked around the living room through his eyes. The worn armchair where his mother used to read, the family photos covering every surface, the scratch coffee table we'd bought together 25 years ago. Everything looked smaller now, shabby, insufficient. I sank back into my chair, but the newspaper lay forgotten. The lamp beside me cast shadows that seemed longer than before. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. A car passed slowly down our quiet street. My hands trembled slightly as I removed my reading glasses. The confrontation had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like something fundamental had shifted, like a foundation crack that starts small but spreads until the whole structure becomes unsafe. Corbett's words echoed in my memory. "Silas calls me a disappointment, says I married above my station." What kind of man says that about his son-in-law? What kind of father allows his daughter to marry someone he considers beneath her? I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heartbeat gradually slow. The doctor had warned me about stress, about emotional upheavals. But how do you prepare for your own son calling you a failure? The house felt different now. Not like home, but like evidence of inadequacy. Through the front window, streetlights flickered on one by one, marking the transition from evening to night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about this family dinner Corbett mentioned. But tonight, I sat alone with the uncomfortable realization that my son saw me through someone else's eyes. And in those eyes, I was nothing worth defending. 20 minutes later, I still sat in the same chair. The house had grown colder since Corbett left. Or maybe the chill came from inside me. I stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked to the mantel. Dusty picture frames lined the shelf like soldiers. There was Corbett at 8, missing his front teeth, grinning beside the treehouse we'd built together. Another showed him in his cap and gown, diploma raised triumphantly. My chest had swelled with such pride that day. "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you," he'd whispered after the ceremony. Different words than tonight's cruel assessment. When had gratitude become resentment? The kitchen called to me. I needed something warm, something routine. While water heated for tea, I traced the scratches on our wooden table with my finger. Homework battles fought here, birthday cakes celebrated, heart-to-heart talks about girls, about dreams, about futures we thought we were building together. Pennsylvania Steel Company had offered me a promotion when Corbett was 8. Plant manager position in Pittsburgh, 30% salary increase, stock options, company car. The whole package that could have changed everything. But Corbett had just started 3rd grade, made friends, joined Little League. I'd watched him finally feel settled after his mother's death the year before. How could I uproot him from my career advancement? "We'll stay put," I'd told my supervisor. "Family comes first." The promotion went to someone else. So did the next one, and the next. Eventually they stopped asking. I poured hot water over a tea bag, watching it steep. Steam rose like tiny ghosts of opportunities past. Through the kitchen window, streetlights illuminated my driveway. Something glinted strangely near my car's front tire, but I couldn't make it out in the darkness. My feet carried me toward the bedroom, teacup warming my hands. More photographs waited on the nightstand. Corbett's wedding day dominated the display. He'd looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so nervous before the ceremony. "What if I'm not good enough for her, Dad?" "Son, any woman would be lucky to have you." But that reception, watching Corbett interact with Mira's family, had been like watching him try on a costume that didn't quite fit. The Villets moved through their marble-floored country club with casual confidence I'd never possessed. Crystal chandeliers, servers in white gloves, champagne flowing like water. Silas had introduced me to his business associates with polite detachment. "This is Norwood Quincy, Corbett's father. He's an engineer." The way he said engineer made it sound like janitor. I'd seen Corbett's face during those introductions, the slight flinch when someone asked what kind of engineering. The quick subject changes when conversation turned to my work. My son was learning to be embarrassed of me. Setting the tea on my nightstand, I sat heavily on the bed's edge. The mattress sagged under my weight, 15 years old, like most everything else in this house. When had comfort become evidence of failure? My motorcycle had been my one luxury. A 1984 Harley-Davidson I'd restored myself, piece by piece. Every weekend in the garage, teaching Corbett about engines, about patience, about taking pride in your work. He'd hand me tools, ask endless questions, beam when I let him start the engine. "Why'd you sell it, Dad?" he'd asked when the bike disappeared. "Wedding present for you and Mira." I'd smiled, hiding the ache. Honeymoon trip to Europe seemed more important. He'd hug me then, tight, grateful. When did that gratitude curdle into tonight's contempt? I pulled off my shoes, letting them drop to the carpet. Each memory felt heavier than lead weights. All those choices made with love, with hope for his future. All those sacrifices that now seemed like proof of inadequacy instead of devotion. The bedside clock read 8:30. Outside, wind rustled through November branches, scratching against the window like fingernails. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading to silence. I lay back against pillows that smelled faintly of lavender, my wife's favorite scent, still lingering after 3 years. She would have known how to handle tonight's confrontation, would have found words to bridge the growing chasm between her son and her husband. But she wasn't here to mediate anymore, just me, alone with the wreckage of good intentions and the growing certainty that love wasn't enough to hold a family together. My eyes closed, but sleep felt impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about Sunday's dinner invitation. Tonight brought only the echo of Corbett's voice calling me a disappointment. The tea grew cold on the nightstand, forgotten. Morning light filtered through bedroom curtains, pale and uncertain. I'd slept poorly, drifting between wakefulness and uneasy dreams, where Corbett's voice echoed with yesterday's cruelty. My joints protested as I swung legs over the bed's edge, a familiar reminder that 70 years had taught my body new limitations. The house felt different in daylight, less wounded somehow. Kitchen routines helped restore normalcy. Coffee brewing, toast browning, newspaper waiting on the front steps like every other morning for the past 15 years. Steam rose from my mug as I shuffled toward the front door in slippers and bathrobe. November air bit through thin fabric, sharp enough to clear lingering drowsiness. Our quiet street was awakening slowly. Mrs. Patterson across the way retrieved her own paper, waving briefly before disappearing inside. Normal. Everything looked wonderfully, reassuringly normal, until I saw my car. Something appeared wrong with the Honda's posture. It listed slightly to one side, like a tired old man favoring a bad knee. I moved closer, newspaper forgotten in my hand. The front passenger tire sat completely flat against the driveway pavement. "Well, that's inconvenient," I muttered, kneeling beside the deflated rubber. My engineering background kicked in automatically. Tires don't simply fail overnight without cause. I examined the sidewall carefully, running fingers along the surface. Cold morning air made my movements slow, deliberate. 3 distinct cuts marked the rubber, clean slashes, not punctures from road debris. Someone had used a knife or similar tool, making precise incisions designed to release air gradually rather than cause immediate blowout. This was deliberate sabotage. I sat back on my heels, mind processing implications. Professional vandalism would target multiple vehicles or more expensive cars. Kids playing pranks typically chose more visible damage: broken windows, spray paint, obvious destruction. These cuts showed restraint, intelligence, purpose. The timing felt significant too. Yesterday evening, after Corbett left, I'd heard unusual sounds outside. Car doors, footsteps, something metallic scraping against pavement. I'd dismissed it as neighborhood activity, too exhausted from our confrontation to investigate. Now, those sounds carried different meaning. 37 years as an engineer, I whispered to the damaged tire. I know intentional damage when I see it. But who would target me specifically? I lived quietly, kept to myself, maintained cordial relationships with neighbors. No enemies worth mentioning. No recent conflicts except... My mind shied away from the obvious connection. Family complications were painful enough without adding criminal mischief to the equation. Surely no son would stoop to vandalizing his father's property over harsh words. Yet the evidence spoke clearly. Someone with access to my driveway, knowledge of my routines, and motivation for petty revenge had crippled my transportation deliberately. The technical precision suggested familiarity with tools, with problem-solving approaches, like someone trained in technology, someone comfortable with systematic thinking. I stood slowly, knees protesting the cold pavement. Mrs. Patterson had gone inside, leaving the street empty again. Morning shadows stretched longer than usual, or maybe I just noticed them more acutely now. The newspaper lay crumpled where I'd dropped it, headlines about local politics and school board meetings suddenly seeming irrelevant. My quiet retirement morning had transformed into something more complicated, more troubling. Walking back toward the house, I felt the violation acutely, not just of property, but of trust, of safety, of the fundamental assumption that home remained a sanctuary from conflict. Someone had crossed a line last night, moving from verbal cruelty to active sabotage. The question wasn't just who, but why now? What had changed to escalate a family disagreement into deliberate destruction? Inside, warmth embraced me again, but it felt fragile now, temporary. The coffee had grown lukewarm while I examined evidence of betrayal in my own driveway. I set the newspaper on the kitchen counter without unfolding it, mind still processing the morning's discovery. 3 clean cuts in a tire sidewall, professional precision in an amateur crime. The phone would ring soon. It always did on Friday mornings. Coffee had grown lukewarm while I stared at headlines about local school board meetings. The newspaper felt heavier than usual, words blurring together as my mind circled back to those 3 deliberate cuts in my tire. Someone had wanted to inconvenience me specifically, personally. The phone's shrill ring startled me back to reality. "Dad?" Corbett's voice carried unfamiliar warmth, Nothing like yesterday's cruelty. I hope I'm not calling too early. My fingers tightened around the receiver. No, son, I was just reading the paper. Listen, about yesterday evening, he paused, exhaling audibly. I said some things I shouldn't have, things that weren't fair to you. Hope stirred in my chest despite everything. We all say things we regret when emotions run high. That's exactly what I told Mira. His tone grew more animated, more like the boy I remembered. She suggested we invite you for Thanksgiving dinner at her father's house. You know, proper family gathering. What do you think? Thanksgiving with the Villets, in Silas's marble palace where crystal chandeliers cast judgment on my second-hand clothes, where servers in white gloves would witness my discomfort. But Corbett was extending an olive branch. My son wanted me there. That's very generous of your wife, I managed. When should I arrive? Thursday afternoon, around 2. Silas will be there, obviously. Some of Mira's cousins from Connecticut. Nothing too formal, just family. Family. The word warmed something cold inside me. Should I bring anything? Dessert, maybe? Don't worry about that. Mira has everything planned. He chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard in months. Just bring yourself, Dad. We miss having you around. My throat tightened. I miss you too, son. Great. So Thursday at 2, I'll text you the address, though you've been there before for the wedding reception. I remember. Perfect. Hey, I should let you get back to your morning routine. See you Thursday. The line went quiet, but not dead. I could hear muffled voices in the background, as if Corbett had set the phone down without properly hanging up. There, happy now? Corbett's voice came through faintly. I played the part perfectly. You did well, darling. Mira's laugh was sharp, delighted. Poor old man sounded so grateful. Did you hear how pathetic he was? Should I bring dessert? My hand froze halfway to hanging up the receiver. Thursday will be perfect, Mira continued. Daddy gets to see exactly how we handle family embarrassments. Show him we're completely loyal to his vision for the inheritance. You sure he'll go through with cutting Dad out of the will? Corbett's voice carried uncertainty. After Thursday's performance, when your father makes a fool of himself in front of Daddy's business associates, when we demonstrate that we're the only family members worth investing in, Mira's confidence was absolute. Trust me, sweetheart. One humiliating dinner and your dear daddy will never see a penny of Villette money. I still feel strange about this. You feel strange about securing our future? About making sure we inherit what we deserve, instead of sharing it with some retired engineer who drives a 15-year-old Honda? Ice formed in my veins. Besides, Mira's voice grew closer to the phone. After the little tantrum you threw with his tire last night, he's probably already suspicious. Better to keep him close where we can control the narrative. The tire. Corbett had damaged my tire. That was childish, he admitted, but satisfying. Childish but effective. Now he knows we're serious about establishing boundaries. Thursday just makes it official in front of the people who matter. Their voices grew fainter as they moved away from the phone. I caught fragments. Business dinner afterward? Daddy's attorney. Won't know what hit him. Then silence. The line finally went dead. I sat motionless, receiver still pressed against my ear, processing the conversation that had just shattered every assumption about my family. The invitation wasn't reconciliation. It was orchestrated humiliation, designed to prove to Silas that I was unworthy of inclusion in his will. My son had sabotaged my car. My daughter-in-law viewed me as an obstacle to wealth. Together, they planned to use Thanksgiving dinner as a stage for my public disgrace. The newspaper slipped from my lap to the floor, headlines scattering like broken promises. Silence filled the kitchen like thick fog. The phone receiver felt impossibly heavy in my hand before I finally set it back in its cradle. My coffee had gone completely cold. The newspaper still scattered where I had dropped it. Everything appeared exactly as it had 30 minutes ago, yet nothing would ever be the same. They had called me pathetic. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, helped through college, sacrificed my career advancement for, had participated in planning my deliberate humiliation. Not just participated, he'd damaged my property, lied to my face, pretended reconciliation while plotting betrayal. I stood slowly, legs unsteady beneath me. Walking felt mechanical, purposeless, but staying still seemed impossible. My feet carried me toward the living room, where family photographs lined the mantelpiece like evidence of better times. There was Corbett's graduation picture, where he'd whispered those grateful words about my support. Empty words, apparently. Had he been calculating even then? Had Mira already begun poisoning his perspective on family loyalty? 15-year-old Honda, I muttered to the empty room, repeating Mira's dismissive phrase. She'd made my modest car sound like proof of failure, rather than evidence of practical choices. Choices made so Corbett could have opportunities I'd never enjoyed. The engineering handbook on my bookshelf caught my attention. 40 years of systematic problem-solving stared back at me from those worn pages. I'd built bridges, designed systems, troubleshot complex mechanical failures. Every challenge required the same approach: gather information, analyze variables, identify weaknesses, design solutions. This was just another problem to solve. I pulled the handbook down, not to read it, but to hold something that represented my actual capabilities rather than their distorted perception. My hands had stopped shaking. The emotional hurricane was passing, leaving behind something colder and more focused. They thought I was weak, embarrassing, someone who would accept victim status quietly. They were wrong. Moving to my small study, I sat at the desk where I'd once helped Corbett with homework. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was where I'd taught him analytical thinking, step-by-step problem-solving approaches he was now using against me. But he'd learned from a master. Their plan depended entirely on my compliance. They expected me to arrive Thursday afternoon, like a lamb for slaughter, to make mistakes in front of Silas's business associates, to prove their point about my inadequacy through bumbling social errors. What if I didn't comply with their script? I opened the desk drawer, retrieving a legal pad. Engineers document everything. If this was a problem requiring solution, it needed proper analysis. At the top of the page, I wrote Thanksgiving strategy in my careful handwriting. Under that, their assumptions. They assumed I would attend as invited. They assumed I would be intimidated by wealth and formality. They assumed I lacked social skills necessary for their environment. They assumed Silas shared their assessment of my worth. But what did I actually know about Silas Villette? A self-made businessman who'd built his empire from nothing. Someone who valued accomplishment over inherited status. A man who'd worked with his hands before owning companies. During Corbett's wedding reception, I'd overheard him telling associates about respecting people who built things rather than just inherited them. Perhaps their biggest assumption was that Silas would automatically side with them. I wrote their weaknesses on the next line. Overconfidence led to carelessness. They'd revealed their entire plan within my hearing. They underestimated my intelligence and capabilities. They assumed family loyalty was one-directional. Most importantly, they didn't know I knew. The element of surprise belonged to me now. My pen moved steadily across the page as the framework took shape. This wouldn't be about revenge in any crude sense. This would be about justice, about protecting my dignity while exposing their true character, about ensuring that if anyone faced humiliation Thursday afternoon, it wouldn't be me. They wanted to show Silas who deserved his inheritance? Perfect. Let them show him exactly who they really were. I glanced at the clock. 9:15 a.m. Thursday was still 6 days away. Plenty of time for careful preparation. Time to call Silas Villette. Finding Silas Villette's personal number took 3 minutes of searching through old phone books. My fingers hesitated over the digits before dialing. This conversation would either create a powerful ally or confirm my complete isolation within this family. The phone rang twice before his gruff voice answered. Villette residence. Silas, this is Norwood Quincy. I apologize for calling so early, but we need to discuss something urgent about Thursday's dinner. Norwood? Surprise colored his tone. Is everything all right? Mira mentioned you'd be joining us. I gripped the receiver tighter. That's exactly what I need to talk to you about. What I'm going to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about why I'm being invited. Silence stretched between us. Then, go on? This morning, Corbett called to extend the invitation. After he thought he'd hung up, I overheard a conversation between him and Mira. They were planning to use Thursday's dinner to humiliate me in front of your business associates. What exactly did you hear? My throat felt dry, but the words came steadily. Mira said, and I quote, Thursday will be perfect. Daddy gets to see exactly how we handle family embarrassments. Show him we're completely loyal to his vision for the inheritance." The silence grew longer this time. When Silas spoke again, his voice carried a cold edge I'd never heard before. "Continue." She talked about demonstrating that they're the only family members worth investing in, about making sure I never see a penny of Villette money. She seemed confident that after Thursday's performance, you'd cut me out of your will entirely. And Corbett agreed to this? More than agreed. He's the one who damaged my car tire the night before last. Mira called it childish but effective, a way of establishing boundaries. I heard what sounded like a coffee cup being set down hard on a table. "Norwood, I want you to understand something." Silas's voice carried the authority that had built his business empire. "I've never mentioned you in my will one way or another, but that's beside the point. The fact that my daughter thinks she can manipulate me into disinheriting anyone based on their social performance, that tells me everything I need to know about her character." Relief flooded through me. "So you believe me?" "Son, I've been in business for 45 years. I know manipulation when I hear it described. The question is, what do we do about it?" The simple word changed everything. "I have some thoughts about that," I admitted. "They're planning to use my supposed social awkwardness against me. What if we turn their plan upside down?" "I'm listening." For the next 20 minutes, we developed a strategy that would expose Corbett and Mira's true nature while protecting our own dignity. Silas knew his guests, successful business people who valued integrity over inherited status. He could position the conversation to reveal character rather than social polish. "They expect you to make mistakes," Silas mused. "What if instead you demonstrate exactly the qualities they claim you lack?" "Engineering requires presentation skills they've never seen me use," I agreed. "Project management, client relations, technical communication, I've done it all. And I can ensure the conversation flows toward topics where your expertise shines rather than social small talk, where they think you'll stumble." We coordinated signals, timing, even seating arrangements that would work in our favor. Silas would introduce business topics that played to my strengths. I would be prepared with specific examples of professional achievements they'd dismissed as irrelevant. "There's one more thing," Silas said, as our conversation wound down. "Mira doesn't know I've been reconsidering my inheritance plans anyway. Recent behavior from various family members has been illuminating." "What kind of behavior?" "Let's just say Thursday won't be the first time I've noticed calculated kindness that disappears when money isn't immediately visible." By 10 o'clock, we had a comprehensive plan. Thursday's dinner would indeed reveal true character, just not the character they expected. Two men who'd built careers through competence and integrity would demonstrate that social class had nothing to do with personal worth. "Norwood," Silas said before hanging up, "I owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening to you in this family." "You're seeing it now. That's what matters." "Indeed it is. See you Thursday at 2. Come prepared to show them who you really are." The phone went dead, leaving me in my study with plans that felt solid as engineered structures. They wanted to expose my inadequacies to influence Silas? Perfect. Let them try. I pulled out fresh paper and began drafting talking points that would showcase 40 years of professional achievements they'd never bothered to learn about. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. The days between our phone call and Thanksgiving passed in careful preparation. I'd rehearsed my role as thoroughly as any actor, practicing expressions of hurt confusion in my bathroom mirror. Today, arriving at Corbett's expansive colonial home with my homemade apple pie, I felt surprisingly calm. Multiple cars filled the circular driveway. Through tall windows, I glimpsed elegant place settings and Mira's signature crystal stemware catching afternoon light. Voices and laughter drifted from inside, the sound of family gathering exactly as they had planned. Perfect audience for their performance. I approached the front door, noting autumn wreaths and expensive decorations that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My finger had barely touched the doorbell when the door swung open. Corbett stood there, but not as I'd expected. No welcoming smile, no gesture toward the warmth inside. Instead, he positioned himself squarely in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking entry completely. "What are you doing here?" His voice carried clearly into the house, obviously intended for the gathered guests. I blinked, genuinely confused by the aggressive tone, despite knowing this was theater. "Son, you invited me for Thanksgiving dinner." "I invited my father." He stepped forward, forcing me back onto the front step. "You're not my father anymore." Behind him, conversation inside had stopped. I could sense heads turning, curious faces approaching the entryway. Mira appeared at his shoulder, her smile sharp with anticipated pleasure. "Corbett, please. What's this about?" "This is about family." His voice grew louder, ensuring every guest could hear. "Real family, people who belong at tables with successful, accomplished individuals, not retired engineers driving 15-year-old cars." The pie felt heavy in my hands. Around us, autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, but inside that warm house, I could feel the chill of shocked silence. "Your grandfather Silas understands quality when he sees it," Corbett continued, gesturing toward the interior. "He knows the difference between people worth investing in and—" His gaze swept over me dismissively. "Embarrassments we're supposed to pretend are family." I heard someone gasp inside. A woman's voice whispered, "Oh my goodness. Son, surely we can discuss this privately." "No." Corbett's voice cut sharp as winter wind. "Privacy is what allowed this charade to continue too long. Everyone should see exactly who you are compared to who we are." Mira moved closer to her husband, practically glowing with satisfaction. Daddy's guests deserved to know why certain people weren't actually invited to family dinner. Through the doorway, I caught glimpses of shocked faces, men in expensive sweaters looking uncomfortable, women covering their mouths in dismay. And there, among them, Silas himself, wearing an expression of perfect grandfatherly horror that would have convinced even me if I hadn't known better. "But I brought dessert," I said quietly, lifting the pie slightly. The gesture felt pathetic even as I performed it. "Keep it." Corbett pointed toward my car with theatrical finality. "Drive back to your little house and eat it alone. That's where you belong." The cruelty landed exactly as intended. Around us, late afternoon shadows stretched longer, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked twice before falling silent. Normal suburban sounds continuing, while my family publicly expelled me from their circle. "I see." I nodded slowly, letting disappointment color my voice. "I understand now." "Good." Corbett stepped back, hand moving toward the door. "Then, this conversation is finished." I turned away, carrying my unwanted pie toward the car parked behind 3 luxury vehicles. Each step felt measured, dignified despite the humiliation echoing behind me. Voices rose inside the house, shocked questions, uncomfortable murmurs, someone attempting to intervene with Corbett. Behind me, the front door closed with finality that echoed across the manicured lawn. Perfect first act. Now, for the phone call that would begin Act 2. I reached my car, set the pie on the roof, and retrieved my cell phone. Silas had given me his private number for exactly this moment. Time to let the real performance begin. Sliding into my driver's seat, I placed the pie on the passenger side and retrieved my phone. Through the car window, I could see figures moving inside Corbett's house, guests settling around the dining table, unaware they were about to witness the second act of today's performance. My fingers found Silas's number with practiced precision. 1 ring, 2. "Yes?" His voice carried the perfect tone of grandfatherly concern. "The curtain has fallen on Act 1, I said quietly. "Understood. Act 2 begins now." The line went dead. Simple as that. No elaborate explanations needed, no dramatic pronouncements. Just 2 men who understood timing and strategy. I settled back in my seat, watching the house with the patience 40 years of engineering had taught me. Inside those bright windows, Thanksgiving dinner was attempting to resume normalcy. Corbett and Mira were probably explaining their actions to curious guests, justifying family boundaries, perhaps even basking in their perceived victory. They had no idea what was coming. Through the dining room window, I could see Silas rising from his chair at the head of the table. Even from this distance, his posture commanded attention. Conversations stopped. Heads turned toward the family patriarch. He spoke briefly, words I couldn't hear but could imagine. Something about needing to leave early, an unexpected development, business requiring immediate attention. The exact excuse didn't matter. What mattered was the authority behind it. One by one, chairs pushed back from the table. I watched Mira's face transform in the window light. Her expression shifted from satisfied smugness to confusion, then growing alarm. She gestured toward the laden table, the untouched meal, the carefully orchestrated gathering that was dissolving before her eyes. But Silas was already moving toward the coat closet, other guests following like iron filings drawn to a magnet. 45 years of business leadership had taught him something Corbett and Mira had never learned. People follow strength, not manipulation. The front door opened. Silas emerged first, his expensive overcoat draped over his arm, face set in lines of dignified disappointment. Behind him came the others, business associates, family friends, people who had driven here expecting traditional holiday warmth, and instead witnessed calculated family cruelty. Cars started in the driveway, engines turning over, gravel crunching, the sound of exodus. I counted vehicles, the Mercedes, the BMW, the Lexus that had arrived, filled with guests now departing, with questions about what kind of family publicly humiliated elderly fathers. Mira appeared in the doorway, still wearing her hostess smile, but frantically gesturing for people to return. Her mouth moved rapidly. Explanations, apologies, desperate attempts to salvage her perfect gathering, but momentum had shifted beyond her control. Corbett joined her, his confident posture from 30 minutes ago replaced by confusion and growing panic. He reached toward departing guests, offering what looked like explanations or justifications for his earlier performance. None of it mattered. The exodus continued with relentless efficiency. Within 15 minutes, the circular driveway stood empty, except for Corbett's and Mira's vehicles. Their grand Thanksgiving celebration, designed to showcase family loyalty and social connections, had dissolved into awkward explanations to an empty house. Standing alone in their doorway, the couple who had orchestrated my public humiliation now faced their own, abandoned by the very audience they had sought to impress, left to contemplate the ruins of their carefully planned manipulation. I started my engine, allowing myself a small smile. Engineering had taught me about leverage points, how small forces, properly applied, could move massive structures. Today's lesson was complete. The phone rang, Silas again, calling from his own car somewhere in the disappearing convoy. Phase 1 accomplished. His voice carried satisfaction, mixed with grim determination. Ready for Phase 2? I glanced once more at the couple still standing in their doorway, probably arguing about what had gone wrong, how their perfect plan had unraveled so quickly. More than ready. My house? Give me 20 minutes to coordinate with my attorney. Some documents need witnessing. Documents? The inheritance changes he'd mentioned during our planning session. The real consequences of their manipulation would extend far beyond one ruined dinner party. I pulled away from the curb, leaving Corbett and Mira to face the silence of their empty house, and the growing realization that their calculated cruelty had backfired spectacularly. The best was yet to come. Driving through the crisp November afternoon, with a convoy of luxury vehicles following behind me, felt surreal. My rearview mirror reflected the parade of confused but trusting guests who had chosen dignity over manipulation. Silas's Mercedes led the pack, followed by cars that had arrived at Corbett's house expecting traditional family warmth. Instead, they were following me home. The irony wasn't lost on me as we moved from their expensive neighborhood toward my modest street. 3 days ago, I'd sat in my kitchen with trembling hands, dialing Silas's number with a plan half-formed and hope nearly exhausted. Today, that same plan had dismantled my son's carefully constructed humiliation with surgical precision. I remembered Silas's voice when I'd explained what I'd overheard. The silence that followed my revelation had stretched so long, I'd wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his tone carried business authority mixed with grandfatherly disappointment. Norwood, I need you to understand something important. I've built everything I own through recognizing character. What you've described isn't just manipulation, it's sociopathy. That conversation had changed everything. 2 fathers, both betrayed by children, who saw family as financial strategy rather than sacred bond. Silas's anger had surprised me with its depth, particularly when I mentioned Mira's confidence about controlling his inheritance decisions. She thinks I'm some doddering old fool who can be managed like a puppet, he'd said. Time to teach them both about miscalculation. We'd spent that Friday afternoon coordinating our response. Silas would play the shocked grandfather convincingly, while positioning himself to lead the guest exodus when I gave the signal. Meanwhile, I would prepare an alternative celebration, real Thanksgiving dinner at my house, complete with turkey, sides, and the kind of genuine warmth Corbett and Mira had replaced with calculated performance. The preparation had been extensive but satisfying. Saturday and Sunday spent shopping, cooking, setting up my dining room with care I hadn't taken since my wife's death. Every detail planned to demonstrate the difference between authentic hospitality and stage manipulation. My phone had rung Tuesday evening with final coordination details. Silas's voice carried grim satisfaction as he confirmed the guest list and timing. They're so confident in their plan, they've invited my attorney as a witness to your supposed social failures. Instead, he'll witness their true character. The attorney. Another piece I hadn't fully understood until now. Silas wasn't just exposing his children's cruelty, he was documenting it legally. Through my windshield, familiar streets approached. Mrs. Patterson would be surprised by the parade of expensive cars following my modest Honda. The contrast would be stark. Luxury vehicles parked outside my 15-year-old house with its small lawn and practical landscaping. But inside, those guests would find something Corbett's mansion couldn't provide: genuine welcome. The turkey I'd prepared yesterday waited in my refrigerator, alongside stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie made from scratch. Not because I expected guests, but because Silas and I had planned this alternative celebration with meticulous care. My neighbors would talk about today for months. The day Norwood Quincy led a convoy of luxury cars to his modest home, hosting Thanksgiving dinner for people who had witnessed his public humiliation and chosen to follow him anyway. Through the rearview mirror, I caught sight of Silas's car signaling for the turn onto my street. Behind him, other vehicles followed with the same careful attention to direction they had shown in leaving Corbett's house. Social authority was a powerful force, and Silas wielded it like the business tool it had always been. We were almost home, almost to the moment when confused guests would understand why they'd followed instinct over expectation, why genuine character trumped performed wealth every single time. The phone rang, Silas again, calling from 3 cars behind me. "Norwood, I've just received a text from my attorney. He's already prepared the documentation we discussed. Today's events provide perfect justification for the inheritance modifications." Inheritance modifications. The final piece of justice for children who treated family like a business opportunity. I turned into my driveway, watching expensive cars line up along my modest street like a parade of vindication. Time to show them what real hospitality looked like. Opening my front door to welcome the convoy of confused but trusting guests felt like engineering's finest moment, a problem solved through careful planning and precise execution. Mrs. Patterson across the street stood at her window, probably wondering why luxury cars filled our quiet neighborhood on Thanksgiving afternoon. "Please, come inside. Everything's ready," I said, stepping back to let Silas lead the group through my modest entrance. Behind him came business associates, family friends, and acquaintances who had expected elegant crystal, but found something warmer. Genuine welcome, my dining room table, extended with folding leaves I hadn't used since my wife's death, accommodated everyone perfectly. The turkey I'd prepared yesterday waited on the kitchen counter, surrounded by homemade stuffing, cranberry sauce, and sweet potatoes that smelled of cinnamon and butter. "Norwood, this is extraordinary," said a woman, whose name I recalled as Margaret, Silas's business partner. "You prepared all this yourself?" "Cooking keeps my hands busy during retirement," I admitted, carving turkey with the precision 40 years of engineering had taught me. "My late wife always said hospitality means making people feel valued, not impressed." The difference became apparent immediately. Where Corbett's house had showcased wealth through intimidating perfection, my home offered comfort through personal touches. Family photographs lined the mantel, including pictures of Corbett from happier times. Mismatched chairs surrounded the table, but each guest found their place naturally. Conversations flowed without the tension I'd witnessed earlier. No one performed for social positioning or calculated advantage. Instead, stories emerged organically: vacation memories, work challenges, shared interests that connected strangers into temporary family. "This reminds me of my grandmother's house," observed a younger man, whose expensive suit looked oddly formal against my casual atmosphere. "She never had much money, but her table always felt like home." Silas positioned himself at one end of the table, but not as commanding patriarch demanding attention. Here, he became simply another guest appreciating honest hospitality. His occasional glances my way carried approval mixed with something deeper, respect between two men who understood the difference between superficial charm and authentic character. "Tell me about your engineering work, Norwood," Margaret requested, accepting seconds of stuffing with genuine enthusiasm. "Silas mentioned you designed bridges?" For 20 minutes, I found myself describing projects that had defined my career. Boston Harbor's pedestrian walkway, the courthouse renovation that preserved historical character while meeting modern safety codes. Structures built to last generations, created by teams who valued function over flashiness. None of my guests checked their phones or glanced at watches. The anxiety that had permeated Corbett's formal gathering dissolved into comfortable conversation. Laughter punctuated discussions about shared experiences, common values, mutual respect for honest work and genuine relationships. "I have to ask," said the young man whose grandmother comment had touched me earlier, "what happened at the other house? That scene at the door was—" "Complicated family dynamics," Silas answered diplomatically. "Sometimes people reveal their true priorities under pressure." The understatement hung in air perfumed with roasting turkey and cinnamon. These guests had witnessed calculated cruelty designed to impress them, followed by authentic kindness that required no audience. The contrast spoke louder than any explanation. As afternoon light slanted through my kitchen window, casting golden warmth across faces relaxed in genuine contentment, I realized we'd created something Corbett and Mira's manipulation could never achieve. Real connection based on mutual respect rather than social positioning. The doorbell rang. Every head turned toward the sound. Through my front window, I could see Corbett's expensive car in the driveway, engine still running. He stood on my front step with Mira beside him, both wearing expressions of aggressive confusion that suggested they'd come for answers rather than apologies. "That would be my son," I said calmly, setting down my coffee cup. "This should be interesting." Silas's eyes met mine across the table. The final act was about to begin. Without waiting for invitation, Corbett pushed through my front door with Mira close behind, both scanning the dining room with expressions that mixed confusion and growing panic. Their expensive clothes looked out of place against my modest decor, like actors who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. "What is this?" Corbett's voice carried across the room, interrupting conversations mid-sentence. "Why are all our guests here?" Margaret set down her coffee cup carefully. "Your guests. We followed Silas when he decided to leave your house." "Leave?" Mira's laugh sounded forced, desperate. "But dinner hadn't even started. The whole celebration was planned around humiliating my father," Silas interrupted, rising slowly from his chair with the dignified authority that had built his business empire. The room fell completely silent. "Yes, Mira, we all heard what you and Corbett did at the door." The color drained from both their faces. Corbett stepped forward, hands gesturing frantically. "Dad, you don't understand. We were just trying to establish appropriate boundaries for family gatherings. Some people don't belong at certain tables." "Appropriate boundaries?" The young man who'd mentioned his grandmother earlier shook his head in disgust. "You publicly rejected your own father on Thanksgiving." "Because he doesn't fit our social circle." Mira's voice rose to near hysteria. "Look at this place. Look at him. Daddy, surely you can see why we needed to distance ourselves from what?" Silas's voice cut through her rambling like ice. "From a man who sacrificed his career advancement so his son could have opportunities? From someone who sold his beloved motorcycle to fund your honeymoon? From a father who's shown more genuine hospitality in 30 minutes than you manage in 30 years. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. These guests had witnessed both performances, the calculated cruelty earlier and the authentic warmth here. The contrast spoke louder than any explanation. "Daddy, you're being manipulated," Mira tried again, desperation making her voice shrill. "He's playing victim to gain your sympathy. This whole dinner is staged to make us look bad." "Staged?" Margaret laughed, gesturing toward the homemade food surrounding us. "Child, this man prepared a complete Thanksgiving dinner for people he'd never met, just because his friend asked him to. When did you last do something that wasn't calculated for personal gain?" Corbett's face flushed red. "You don't know anything about our family dynamics. My father has always been an embarrassment. Tonight was just making it official." The words hung in air thick with disapproval. Every guest stared at my son with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. In trying to justify his cruelty, he'd only revealed its depth. Embarrassment. Silas repeated the word slowly, letting it settle over the room. Son, let me tell you about embarrassment. Embarrassment is discovering your daughter thinks family love should be conditional on social status. Embarrassment is learning your son-in-law considers kindness a weakness worth punishing. He walked around the table toward Corbett and Mira, his voice gaining strength with each step. Embarrassment is realizing you raised a child who values inheritance over integrity, who would humiliate an elderly man to impress strangers, who mistakes wealth for worth. But we were protecting your reputation, Mira whispered, tears forming in her eyes. All your business associates seeing you associated with genuine human decency? Silas's question silenced the room. Mira, these people have spent the last hour getting to know your father-in-law. They've heard about bridges he designed that still stand strong, about teams he led with respect instead of intimidation, about a man who measures success by how much he can give rather than how much he can take. The guests murmured agreement. I caught Margaret nodding emphatically, the young man leaning forward with interest, others exchanging glances of understanding and support. What they've seen, Silas continued, is a man who welcomed strangers into his home without expecting anything in return. What they witnessed at your house was calculated cruelty designed to eliminate competition for money you haven't earned. Corbett and Mira stood frozen, isolated in the center of a room full of people who'd chosen dignity over wealth, character over status. Their plan had backfired completely, exposing them as the very embarrassment they had tried to project onto me. This isn't over, Corbett finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Actually, Silas said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket, it is. From his jacket pocket, Silas withdrew a folded document, his movements deliberate and final. The paper rustled in the sudden silence as every pair of eyes focused on what would determine the ultimate consequences of this family revelation. This, he said, unfolding the pages carefully, is a revised version of my will, prepared by my attorney and witnessed by Margaret here earlier this week. He glanced toward his business partner, who nodded solemnly. It reflects my assessment of character based on recent events. Mira stepped forward desperately. Daddy, please. You can't judge us based on one misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Silas's voice carried the authority that had closed million-dollar deals. Child, I've spent 45 years learning to evaluate character. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated plan to humiliate a good man for financial gain. Corbett's face had gone ashen. What are you saying? I'm saying that Norwood Quincy represents the values I hope to pass down to my family. Integrity, sacrifice, genuine care for others. Silas looked around the room at the assembled guests. What I witnessed today was the difference between a man who welcomes strangers without expecting anything in return and children who scheme to eliminate family members they consider inconvenient. The document crackled as he refolded it. Therefore, the bulk of my estate will be placed in a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting working families and educational opportunities for deserving students. Mira, you'll receive enough to maintain comfortable independence, but not enough to fund the kind of lifestyle that breeds contempt for others. You can't be serious, Mira whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dead serious, Silas replied, and Norwood will serve as the foundation's first chairman, ensuring that my money goes toward building character rather than destroying it. The room fell silent except for Mira's quiet sobbing. Corbett stood frozen, apparently unable to process the complete destruction of everything he'd schemed to achieve. Margaret spoke into the silence. I think that's the most appropriate use of inherited wealth I've ever witnessed. Around the table, other guests murmured agreement. Without another word, Corbett turned toward the door. Mira followed, her designer shoes clicking against my hardwood floor like a retreat drumbeat. Neither looked back as they left my house for what I suspected would be the final time. The door closed behind them with quiet finality. Well, said the young man who'd mentioned his grandmother, that was justice served with remarkable dignity. For the next hour, my modest living room filled with the warmth of genuine conversation. Guests shared stories about their own families, about the difference between wealth and worth, about the importance of character over status. Margaret invited me to join their business association's charity committee. Others suggested regular dinner gatherings where real hospitality could flourish. As evening shadows lengthened across my lawn, the convoy of expensive cars gradually departed, but not before each guest had expressed gratitude for witnessing what they called authentic family values in action. Silas lingered longest, helping me clear dishes while we talked about the foundation's mission and future plans. "You know," he said, drying my grandmother's china with careful attention, "I think my daughter's greatest failure was never understanding that the best inheritance isn't money. It's the ability to create genuine connections with other people." After he left, I sat in my favorite armchair, surrounded by the comfortable silence of a house that had finally hosted the kind of gathering my wife would have loved. The earlier humiliation felt like something that had happened to someone else, overwhelmed by the discovery that strangers could become friends through shared values rather than social positioning. My phone rang once, probably Corbett calling to argue or plead, but I let it go to voicemail. Some conversations belong to the past. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was taking in her mail, and she waved when she saw me at the window. Tomorrow, she'd probably ask about all those fancy cars. I'd tell her about making new friends who appreciated homemade pie over store-bought status. The sweetest victory, I realized, wasn't in watching my son's plan crumble, but in learning that dignity preserved creates its own reward. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.